Hi everyone, and welcome to the Rjkworldtour podcast, episode 2. In this episode, as promised, I'm having a conversation with a fellow traveller, and that man is my friend Dan. Now, Dan is a guy that I originally met at university, but I really got to know him better when I was travelling, when I met up with him in Australia. The reason that I wanted to get Dan onto this podcast is that I love talking to him. He's very insightful, very interesting, but he describes things very well, and he always gives a balanced opinion of things. So he's somebody that is well worth listening to. Now, at the end of the episode, I give what Dan describes as a shameless plug. Dan is a musician, and he's just recorded and released his second album. I've listened to it, I really like the stuff that he does, and my favourite track is one called Forgotten Son. It's really catchy, you should give it a listen, you won't be disappointed. Dan's made this music really easy to access, so you can get it on SoundCloud, iTunes and YouTube, or you can go to danielshipley.co.uk. It's really easy to get, so spend a few minutes, just give the guy a bit of support, see what you think, because I know a lot of hard work, blood, sweat and tears has gone into it. Any feedback that you do have for this podcast, anything that's constructive, feel free to get in touch with me, and I hope you enjoy the conversation that I have with Dan. So Dan, can you tell me where you've travelled to?
Well, I mean, when I was a kid, me and my family always used to go away, more or less. In fact, it was almost exclusively in Europe, but I think that's where the travel bug was sort of started, really. And I think that really whet my appetite to do more on my own. And then I took some time out between A-levels and university, and I travelled around Europe with a friend. I guess it was interrailing, but it was just kind of like short trips here and there. And then I did something similar to what you did, where I went to America and did the whole Camp America thing. And that was a real pivotal moment in my life, really, where I think that it kind of gave me the confidence to sort of be myself and to kind of to do things that I perhaps had never done before, to be kind of embraced for the things that I could do well. So I taught music out there, and that opened up a lot of doors, and it kind of sort of prepared me for university. But so for that reason, I would recommend that anyone takes a gap year between high school and university, or perhaps when they finish university, between university and work.
That's certainly something I got a lot of benefit out of doing a summer in America, because what I thought life was having a 1-week holiday in Iron Apple every year, and going to America and spending a prolonged period of time like away from home, experiencing new things that you'd never do before, really opened my eyes. Even though it's American, it's the same language and there's similarities in the culture, and it's both Western civilizations and that. I certainly got a lot of benefits, and yeah, that was the one that inspired me to do my 2.5-year trip.
No, definitely. I mean, I think that where you go, it's good to step out of your comfort zone. It's good to take a chance, because ultimately, how can you be objective about your situation? Like, I think that one of the best things about travelling is coming back home, because you have an appreciation of what you've got, and you can't possibly have that perspective until you've stepped out of it. And I think that's really important. People, they get so preoccupied with what they don't have, or their frustrations with our society in Britain. And I think sometimes going somewhere else and seeing the advantages and disadvantages from country to country really gives you that appreciation of where you're from and perhaps the opportunities you've been given. I mean, not exclusively. Sometimes it might inspire you to leave altogether, but I think that you don't truly know until you step out.
I was going to say that as well. If you go away for quite a long period of time, it can have an effect either way. I've known people who've gone travelling for, actually, I want to try and make my life somewhere else. And I've also known, I know you're in that category, and me to some extent, is that you do start to appreciate how nice England is. And it's not because you go to all these places and you think, oh, this is rubbish, look how good England is. You still appreciate the places and the different cultures and stuff. But
of course, and I mean, you know, Britain is never going to touch Nepal for mountains. It's never going to touch Australia for beaches. And it's not about placing or us pitting Britain against other countries. It's not about that at all. It's just about contrast. And you can't possibly appreciate something, I think, until you've kind of stepped out of it and looked at it objectively. And I think that's a real string to your bow if you go travelling. I don't want to sound like a travel purist. I think that there's a lot of those people around who feel that you've got to do it in order to be a well-rounded human being. I don't believe that at all. But I do think that if you've got that bug and you've got that itch, and the only thing that is stopping you really is just perhaps the fear of the unknown, just to take that step. I'm friends with plenty of people who their passion isn't travel, it's something else, and we get on like a house on fire. I don't think you have to travel in order to be happy, but I do think that if it's something that you are, as I say, enthused about, you should just take the plunge and have a go.
I mean, that's one of the reasons that I'm doing this, is to try and get information out there. It's clearly something that we both feel passionate about and like doing. If people are thinking either way, you should go for it. There's plenty of reasons why not to go travelling. You might have a job that you love, or you might have responsibilities with your family, or you might be more interested in setting up your own business or your career, but it's something that is accessible to a lot of people.
Well, that's it, and there's different shades to travel. You don't have to go to the end of the world. I mean, we're really blessed to live in Europe, where you can get on a £35 flight and you're in Stockholm or you're in Rome, and we've got the Channel Tunnel, and it means you don't even have to get off the ground. You can just take a train and you're in a totally different country. So I don't think it's necessarily how long you go for or how many miles you travel in order to get there. I think it's ultimately about what you take away from it. Sounds a little bit poetic, but I really do think that. And having travelled to the end of the world and met people that are spending all their time getting shit-faced in one place in Australia, I mean, I think that they're having a very different time to someone who perhaps is doing it a different way. I don't think there's a right or a wrong way to travel, but ultimately I think it's what you take out of it.
Yeah, definitely. So me and yourself have just done 2 completely different trips, and that's where our paths crossed in Australia. I took a different route to you. Obviously, I went around Southeast Asia and then did the working holiday thing in Australia. But can you explain the trip that you did where our paths did cross?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've done a bit of travelling in South America before. Like, I'd been to Peru for a month and I really loved it. And I had a real sort of enthusiasm to go back. And I, for some reason, was really struck with Patagonia. I think, having sort of travelled across Canada, I've got a real appetite for mountains and glaciers and stuff. So I went to Buenos Aires and joined a Rjkworldtour. And like, looking back at that objectively, I'm not sure whether that was the right decision. I've kind of got mixed feelings about it. I think organised treks like G-Adventures and Trek America and things like that are amazing ways of meeting like-minded people and doing a lot in a finite amount of time. But the difficulty with that, of course, is that if you've got a lot of flexibility and you wish to go at your own pace, it can feel slightly, I don't know what the word, sort of regimented. I got into Buenos Aires, got mugged on my first day. Well, not mugged as much, but kind of swindled in the taxi. So that wasn't a good start, but that was the one and only time that happened, and things could only really get better from there. So from that I went into Patagonia, which is at the very south of Argentina and Chile, and that sort of month was filled with glacial hikes, going down the Beagle Channel on a boat, hiking up mountains, and staying in refuge lodges and things like that. It was a really extreme adventure. And then I got a plane back to Buenos Aires and joined another Rjkworldtour that actually departed from Rio, and that went through the southern beaches of Brazil, up into the Iguazu Falls, and then through the Brazilian wetlands into Bolivia. And that was amazing, but I think by that time, I probably got slightly tired of group travel, and I think in retrospect, I would have been a lot better doing it on my own. But having said that, I met some really wonderful people in that group. We ended up recording a song together because we were all musicians in Bolivia and filming a music video, and really kind of bonded over it. But from there I went to New Zealand, and then ultimately I met you in Melbourne. And it was a really strange experience actually, because we probably knew each other at university through football, but largely playing against each other. And largely perhaps talking after or before the games. So it was a nice opportunity to meet a familiar face, but I think really it was the first time that our sort of friendship went from having a quick chat on a football pitch to genuinely kind of getting to know one another. And I think what made it really special is that we did that at the Australian Open in Melbourne, What didn't we? And we
Yeah, I'm the final week of uni, and I saw you in some bar, and we just had a general chat about what we're doing after uni. You said, this is me on Facebook, add me, and if you're ever in Nottingham, we'll go for a pint. And I thought, oh, what a nice guy, but there's no chance I'll ever see him again. And then, would you know it, 5 years later in Melbourne and Sydney, and yeah, we're getting on like a house on fire. I want to touch back to what you said about group tours.
Yeah.
I personally didn't go for that. Not that I'm particularly against it. I just thought I'd try and get it done myself. It sounds like you thought the first one was a good idea, and then maybe it was tour overkill for this.
Yeah, possibly, but at the same time, the amazing thing about G Adventures and certain companies, I think there's a huge difference between, let's say, a Kontiki tour, a G Adventures tour, and a Trek America tour. They are for different things, and they're organised in very different ways. And the good thing about G Adventures is that you are shown around by a native, someone who's from Argentina, or whatever.
Yeah.
They know the Trek inside out. They can take you to the restaurants and to the places that ordinarily you would never find off your own back. We also didn't achieve some things that I know that I just simply wouldn't have been able to have done on my own. And I did meet some really solid friends during that. And I think that when you go into an area of the world like South America, where you might have some concerns over safety, or just generally the infrastructure there might not be as backpacker friendly compared to, let's say, Southeast Asia, it does kind of give you that strength in numbers. But I would say that it can become a little bit like a prison at times if you want to slow things down, do things at your own pace, and kind of perhaps meet, I don't know, new people, because you are, if you don't get on with someone on day one, by day 28, you're sick of it. I think that they're a really good thing, and I would use someone like G Adventures again. So, for example, when I went to Nepal, I think I had 2 or 3 weeks, and it was the best thing I could have possibly done, because the amount I achieved in that period of time was phenomenal. But I'd say if you've got an indefinite time period, I would perhaps use a tour, but perhaps try and sandwich some sort of independent travelling in there somewhere.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people in Asia, they did, I won't mention the company's name, but they did an introduction in Thailand, which was a week, where they were in a group of about 14 or something like that. And what I heard about that was pretty good. It was a fun time.
Yeah.
The workers weren't natives, they were fellow English people. And I think that worked for them, because it built their confidence of, like you said, if you're worried about being safe in these third world countries, essentially, and you think you're worried about crime and where to stay and small details you might not consider, then it's probably a good idea. Because I know a lot of people, well, a few people did these tours, and it built the confidence. They met fellow people in the tours, and then after that week was done, able to go off, spread their wings, if you like.
Well, definitely, and that's what I did. I mean, when I got to New Zealand and Australia, which admittedly English-speaking countries, I travelled completely on my own. And then when I got to Southeast Asia, which is a well-trodden tourist trail, I was able to do the same, and I had the confidence and the know-how to do so. I think my reservations with Patagonia is that it's literally at the end of the world. You're a short ferry ride from the South Pole when you get to somewhere like Ushuaia, and I was a little bit concerned about getting from A to B, and that infrastructure of a group tour allowed me to do so without having to stress too much. But having had that experience, I think that I would be more inclined to go back and do things under my own steam. But I'm really not a snob about it. I can remember sitting in Buenos Aires, and some guy who's been travelling for like 13 months in South America on his own kind of poo-pooed my approach, and I thought, well, we're all different, we've all got different wants and needs. You may wish to sort of spend a month looking around the temples and the bazaars, someone else might want to be hiking up a glacier. And I think the most liberating thing about travel is ultimately you get to like craft your own experience.
Definitely. I personally wouldn't choose to do a tour. I've got nothing against them. I think they are a good idea, but it's just not my style. But having said that, I can definitely see the advantage of using them. So I would say that it's certainly a gateway into travelling, if nothing else.
And different companies offer different extents of like autonomy. The good thing about the company that I used is that when you're in each city, your time is your own, so you do whatever you want, but ultimately you have to kind of work to an itinerary. which gets a little bit irritating. But I'm not a snob about it, and I think that if you've got a small amount of time and you want to pack in as much as you possibly can, it's a reasonable way to go.
That's one style. I think for me personally, I like to do things in my own time.
Yeah.
The closest I got to a tour, but it wasn't really a tour, was when I did the east coast of Australia. What it was is that I only had about 2.5 weeks to do the thing. It meant I had to book everything up in advance and have set dates, and it was just rushing around. And don't get me wrong, I had some good experiences, but for me personally, it didn't suit me, just because you'd turn up into a place, put my bag down and go and do an activity, sleep at night, and then I'd be on the bus to the next place, and rather than having appreciation. And whereas when I did Southeast Asia, I just rocked up to a place and then started exploring, and when I was fed up with it, I'd just move on. I think that sort of suits my style a little bit more.
But I think the difference is when you were in Australia, you were, pulling in a wage. Whilst when you're in South Asia, your money goes a lot further.
Yeah,
you can perhaps afford to have that kind of I'll chill out here.
Yeah,
and maybe I'll jump on a bus. Maybe I won't. Whilst I found it amazing in Australia when I went to these places like Byron Bay and Airlie Beach, which, I don't know, I'm a bit of a cynic about some of these places, because I think that perhaps once upon a time they were kind of full of hipsters, creative artists and things like that, and surfers, and now it's become slightly commercialised, and you get a lot of people that seem to kind of stay in these places indefinitely. And let's not beat about the bush, Australia is one of the most expensive countries in the world, and it's one of the worst places you can take the British pound. And I thought, how are you managing just to bum about for 3 months? First of all, from a boredom point of view, I know that if you're with the right people and whatever, I'm not knocking that, but I just think, how can you afford? I mean, some of these youth hostels, I'm presuming that you encounter them as well in Australia, you're talking £20-25 a night, which can, in places in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia, can get you a small palace. And I think, how are you able to sustain this? I think it also is dependent on your budget. I definitely subscribe to what you're saying. When I got to Southeast Asia, I definitely was able to slow down and take things at a pace that I was able to. But there were times in Australia and New Zealand where I thought, I've got to move on because I can't
so
afford
expensive.
to stay here anymore.
A couple of things that you said that are interesting there. Yeah, you're right. The approach I had in Asia, if I think, I'll book a bus for tomorrow, I'll just chill out here for another day. Hostels are literally $5 or £3 a night, and that's not an exaggeration.
No.
And then you'd have a couple of meals a day, which again can be £1 or £2 per meal. Again, not an exaggeration.
Yeah.
You go for a few drinks in the evening, your whole day costs less than a tenner.
Yeah.
Whereas in Australia, you stay an extra day, your hostels already cost more than that. You got to cook your food and can eat super noodles and a pan, but no one really wants to do that. And if you have any drinks, well, when you've added the hostel, your food and a couple of drinks, you could be talking in excess of $60, so around about 30 odd quid, and you've not even done anything yet.
Yeah, you could stay alive.
Yeah, so from
you've not seen anything,
you've not
gone anywhere, you've eaten and slept. Yeah.
So from that point of view, absolutely right. The other thing I was going to pick up on is that Australia, the East Coast, I know people had amazing times on it, and I definitely had my moments where I really enjoyed it, but again, it is a bit of a gateway into the world of backpacking, really. It's kind of the equivalent of Disneyland. I remember someone describing it to me.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I don't want to be too scathing about it, because I think it's very different, living and travelling in the country. And I think I got an insight into the living because I stayed with people that were living and working there. And me and you also connected, and you were living and working there. And I think, there's some wonderful places along that coast. I mean, Melbourne particularly, I think, is a fantastic city. Sydney, once you get out into the Royal National Park and things like that, you really get an idea for what a fabulous area of the world that is. But at the same time, there is this kind of north to south, south to north kind of preset, safe that attracts perhaps people that want that, and that's perfectly fine. But it can be a little bit soul destroying in parts, because people seem to exclusively hit places to get as shit faced as they can. And it's a shame that a country as wonderful and as rugged and as arid and as kind of exotic, I suppose, as Australia has got these kind of pockets of just Westerners getting absolutely out of their face. It's a shame. I mean, it's easy to be pompous about it. It's all over Europe. Places like Prague and Amsterdam. There's also that. I don't think there's many places in the world that have escaped that, but I did start to tire of it after a while.
It depends what you want, really, out of things. Let's be honest. I think both of us have had some great times before after we've had a few beers.
Yeah.
I think, personally, my mindset changed when I was away, and I think I'd rather, first and foremost, enjoy and experience the places that I was visiting rather than getting out of control. But if you want to do that, it's fine, and you're not the first person to do it over there.
The responsibility that you have, though, and I think that we live in a country that attracts a lot of tourists as well, you know, like London particularly, is that if you're going to another country and you are trying to appreciate that country, like, you should ultimately kind of respect the fact that it's also someone's home. And I think that the danger with travel is quite a selfish pursuit in many ways. People go travelling for selfish reasons, unless you're doing voluntary work or you're going around to teach and all that kind of stuff. That's fair enough. But normally you're going out to kind of enrich your own mindset and kind of, I don't know, maybe experience another culture and give yourself that experience. But you have to also remember that it's someone's home and they don't necessarily want to be tripping over the aftermath of a good night out, I suppose. But I don't want to get too heavy on the whole connection between drinking and travelling, because I don't think there's a lot of people in the world that sort of drink responsibly. But yeah, back to your sort of point about the East Coast, I think there's some incredible experiences.
Yeah.
And there's some of the people that I met along the way, they were kind enough to take me into their home and they cooked for me, and you know, they treated me like family. I will never forget that. I remember when I was in Melbourne and this guy that I met travelling in Nepal, he drove me almost the length of the Great Ocean Road.
Great drive, by the way.
Yeah, and an amazing thing to do. And he bought me dinner, and he, you know, in a really beautiful restaurant, and he really just enthused me about his home, and I will never forget that. And I think those are the kind of experiences that are indelible and sort of stay with you forever, much in the same way as when me and you went to watch the tennis.
I think I like my own story and my own adventure, and I think with the East Coast, I felt like I was, like you said before, I was just doing the same things as everyone else, and a bit more difficult to make it my own, just because I'd done a lot of activities such as diving the Barrier Reef and the skydiving in Mission Beach, Fraser Island, which is where you drive a four-wheel drive on the beach in an island covered in dingoes in some spots. The Whitsunday, beautiful beach, but I'd seen so many photos and heard so many stories about it before, I felt like it wasn't my own. But having said that, is gateway to get in, because you can book everything in the package deal for a pretty reasonable price, and you don't have to think about anything. Everything's all mapped out for you and everything's booked in. So from that point of view, it can be good, but I think just for me, I do like my own story and my...
Well, definitely. I mean, when you kind of herd like sheep into certain places, loosely speaking, you're going to have the same experiences the other 20 people that are on that tour, but at the same time, the more sort of subtle personal moments that you can get whilst travelling, whether it's meeting friends that are going out to a fabulous restaurant, or maybe going over to their house and meeting their family, or maybe just getting off the beaten track and seeing something that's not in the guidebooks. Like, they're the kind of things that perhaps look on really fondly. I think the difficulty is that you develop your own narrative. You have this, and when you come back home and try to impart that to your friends and your families, it's an impossible job, because you can't possibly describe or paint that picture. You can't tell them how that felt. You can't articulate yourself sufficiently. And I think we were talking about this earlier. It's like, I think a real challenge is not just going travelling, it's also coming back. I mean, you were away for like 2.5 months, so 2.5 years.
Yes.
And like coming back to the UK, I'm sure that it was something that you were both looking forward to do, but you were probably quite anxious about it as well, weren't you?
It taken me a long time to come round to Australia, living and working there. I particularly didn't find it easy in the first 6 or so months, and then I found my feet and started working properly, started enjoying it a little bit more, started to see a bit more of that side of the world. And then I moved to Sydney. Again, didn't like it at first, but adjusted to it. So a year in Melbourne and then pretty much another year in Sydney. And by the end of Sydney, I really, really sort of grew to like it and enjoyed it. I had a good group of friends and a steady job, and almost started to set up the foundations of a life out there. And then you settled, and all of a sudden that's about to end. You worry about, is it those 2.5 years, are things going to be the same with all your friends and your family and that? But when you do see everyone, as you know yourself, however long you've not seen a good friend or family member for, within 5 minutes, it's like you've never been away, really.
The difficulty is that the life that you've been leading, whilst you're travelling, seems to proceed at a really fast pace, because you're just taking in so much every day. Your mind is being stretched like every single day. That exists somewhere out of reality. That's not a sustainable lifestyle. Backpacking. I mean, it's an amazing thing to do, but at the same time, it's not really a career option unless you're Michael Palin or something. When you come back home, people are doing what people all over the world are doing. They're earning money and they're looking after their family and they're putting food on the table, and it suddenly seems like your life comes to a crashing stop. And that's not downplay or to criticise people that aren't travelling. It's just that your world and your life kind of exists in an alternate universe in many ways. And I think for that reason, I just always want to sort of strive to try and find that happy medium. I love coming home and I love seeing my family, and I love having those subtle experiences of investing in that network of friends that you mentioned, but at the same time, as I say, perhaps saving up to go away and to have that kind of adventure is really important as well for me.
Okay, so where would you reckon that you'll end up next if you do another trip?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm really enjoying being back in Europe, and I'm really enjoying being back in Britain. Well, since I've come back, I've been to Oxford and Cambridge and Bath and Bristol and explored areas that I perhaps haven't explored before. So I've really enjoyed that. Earlier this year, I've been to Italy, and in about 3 or 4 weeks, I'm going back to Budapest. When I was 18, I only went for the day. So I'm really enjoying that. But in terms of international travel, I love South America. I just think it's an incredible continent. It's a huge landmass. It's so diverse, and I would love to go to places like Colombia and Venezuela. But I don't know. It's been a while since I've been back to America, and what I love about the States is how each individual state is so distinct.
It's like its own country, isn't it?
Yeah,
really?
And every different state's got its own music scene. And I'm a huge music fan, and what I love about the States is that when you go into a blues bar, it's so organic, it's almost tangible, you can touch it. This guy has been singing the blues since the moment he could sort of play guitar.
Yeah.
The moment he could stand up. And I love that about America. So, I don't know, there's so many places. I mean, the African continent I haven't touched.
Yeah, me neither.
I mean, it's embarrassing that we're talking about travel, and if you actually look at how much of the world that we've covered, and we consider ourselves to be fairly well-traveled, it's pitiful.
Yeah, it's not even 10% probably, is it?
No, I mean, there's countries I'd love to go back to. I'd love to go back to Nepal and actually do the Annapurna circuit, which looks amazing. So, there's just so much. What about you? I mean, you're going back to Australia possibly to live and work again, but I mean, if you were to get back on your back again, what would you do?
A lifelong ambition has always been to go to Hawaii. I've heard good things, but I've also heard that it might be a bit commercialised. But the only way to find out is to actually go. So that would be one place, and maybe some of the other Polynesian islands, like Fiji and Samoa. I think that, again, like you, America's a place that's always fascinated me. I had a couple of amazing summers there, just working and living for 2 or 3 months at a time, and absolutely loved it. But there's places there that I've not seen that I'd like to go to. I made it to California, but I didn't see San Diego, which is apparently amazing, and San Francisco. I never saw that.
Really?
No.
Well, San Fran's flipping awesome.
I mean, I just stayed in LA.
Oh, mate.
I know.
Error.
I mean, I liked LA though, because
really?
yeah, I mean, I had a good time there.
I don't know. I just find LA is just kind of sprawling, massive suburbs.
It's so big. It's possibly the biggest place I've ever seen. We went to a mountain. It's near the Hollywood Boulevard, and I forget what it's called. It's not even a mountain, really. It's more of a hill. And there's an observatory there, and you can look out onto the whole of LA, and you just can't see the end of it. It's just that big. I think it's 18 million that they know about, and then another 6 or 7 that they don't. It's just such a massive place. But
I think one of the biggest cities I've been to is Seoul in South Korea. Like I've been to South Korea twice, and actually just such a fascinating country. Like historically, it's been through so much. And also just the people. I think that's the beauty of the country. It's, it's not going to wow you from an architectural point of view. I'm sure that you've been to more kind of mountainous, sort of scenic places, but it's just the people and the culture. Like they're so, this tiny peninsula has been isolated for so long. It's changed hands between the Japanese and the Chinese, and now it's the centre of like commerce, and it's like the home of Samsung and LG. But that kind of Buddhist sort of Confucianism is still there. The way that people eat together and they bath together and they socialise and they date, and it's just a fascinating place.
Did you go to Cambodia?
I did, yeah.
See, I found that the people there seemed to be one of the nicest sort of groups of people.
So much.
I was going to say that was because of the dictatorship. When was
Pol
it?
Pot.
Yeah, about 1980s. Is it 70s? Was it?
I think so.
And so when I went, and obviously you went within a year or so of me, that people either were affected or they've known someone who was affected dramatically from that.
And to be honest, that's what really blew my mind when you went to like the killing fields. And it's always a difficult decision to go to these places. Like I've been to Auschwitz, and I purely went there just to kind of develop an understanding. I'm not there for any other reason. I just want to have an appreciation and insight to what happened. And when you go into the killing fields, you've got some guy in a tuk-tuk telling me, do you want to go and find AK-47 first? You'll have a better appreciation of the killing fields when you get there. And I thought, Jesus, like a quarter of your country died, so by virtue of that, your family were probably affected. So, you think, how on earth can you say that? But then again, it's easy for me to say that because that guy's just wanting to put bread on the table, that guy's just wanting to get money in his pocket, and maybe I shouldn't be so kind of baffled by it, because ultimately he just wants to make a living. I just felt very conflicted about the whole thing.
I had a conflicting bit of emotion there as well. Is it, S21, is that the prison you mean? Is it called that?
I just went to the killing fields where,
I went to the killing fields, and on the same day I went to, I think the prison's called S21.
Right, okay.
You go through and it's a horrific place. What was interesting there is they've got, I think there's 3 elderly guys who have survived S21, or they escaped the killing fields. People were taken to this S21 for no reason whatsoever and just tortured for nothing, and then when they'd had enough they just dragged them to the killing fields, and it's horrific scenes. But there was 3 people at S21 and they weren't all there on the day I went. There was one guy, but then another guys, and there's another guy, etc. And they've all got a book, and it's their story of them escaping from the killing fields, which was almost unheard of. And this guy, he was taken to the killing field with, I believe, his son. He just ran away and left his son for dead. And I'm not a father myself, but part of me thought, how on earth could you possibly just leave your child just to be slaughtered by these awful people? How could you leave him behind? Then the other part of me thinks, what a desperate place he must have been through to actually run away. And of course, logically, he was never going to escape with his son, but he might have stood a chance alone. And it's just to imagine that place he must have been in to escape, to just leave his son. And I'm not a father myself, so I don't know the bond, but obviously I know it's a strong one. He must have been in such a bad place, and to experience that whole day, it's not a joyous day at all, but it's something it's well worth doing.
That's the other thing about travel, isn't it? It's not just that you can take from it what you want to, and like some of these experiences that we've mentioned, they're incredibly emotionally draining experiences, but they sort of stay with you and they make you reflect on your own situation and how much sheltered your life is, and you hopefully will never have to kind of have that dilemma. It's easy to kind of hypothesize about why he did it or didn't do it, but you're just reflecting on your own childhood and perhaps your own upbringing. It really makes you realise how fortunate you are, and yeah, that's the great thing about travel. It just enriches you, and it asks you questions that maybe you've never had to contemplate before. I just think that's the wonderful thing about travelling.
Alright, so obviously we're running out of time. I'll just ask you a couple of things before we turn this thing off.
Okay.
If anybody was on the fence about travelling, what one bit of advice would you say to someone who's thinking about it?
I would say, it's a cliche, isn't it, that people sort of say we regret the things we don't do rather than the things that we do. It kind of gets bounded around. Yeah. But I think that if you've got that itch and, the consequences of travelling wouldn't impact profoundly on your family, and really it's just a kind of, it's a heart over mind decision, let's say, I think that just go for it. It's an oversimplification. Everyone's got their own situation, but I think that if you've got that desire to go and you're perhaps slightly afraid of the unknown, take that step. You don't have to go for a year. You have to go for 6 months. You can go for a month. You can go for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
It's what you do. It's how you apply yourself, and it's what you take away. And I think it's one of the most liberating, emancipating things that you can do. So yeah.
Lastly, touched about how you had a lot of love for music, and you've got your own album coming out soon.
This is a shameless plug. This is a shameless plug.
No, I've heard 3 or 4 tracks of it, been impressed by it, and I would recommend people at least give it a listen and just see what they think, because I know you appreciate constructive feedback and just want to get your stuff out there. So, just describe sort of what it is, and if they are interested, where could they find it?
Well, without wanting to shamelessly plug it, and just to get back to the travel thing, really, I think a lot of these songs that I've written have either been written whilst travelling or reflecting on travel, and I think that's been a really positive thing that I've managed to combine music with travel. When I was in America, I was lucky enough to kind of teach music as well, and I think that's a great thing about travel, is that you can combine it with so many things, whether you want to join a surf school or whether you want to, volunteer, whether you want to teach, whether you want to play music, and I think that is the great thing, that you can kind of custom travel to your tastes. But yeah, I've just written a batch of songs that have been inspired by the 7 months that I spent travelling. The album's going to be called Climb the Wall, and it's recorded, it's just being mixed, and if you want to have a closer look, it'll be released on iTunes, or you can listen for free at danielshipley.co.uk.
Cool. Thanks, Dan.
Alright, matey.